In the wild, this behavior gets an animal killed. Any bird that lets a much larger creature walk within arm's reach of it, again and again, without flinching, without flying away, is supposed to end up as a meal within days. That is not an opinion. That is how predator and prey have worked for millions of years. And yet, right now, in almost every city on Earth, one bird breaks that rule constantly, walking calmly past your feet, standing on your table, letting you get closer than almost any wild animal ever would. So here is the real question. Why hasn't that gotten pigeons killed? Step into almost any major city, and you will see it immediately. In London's Trafalgar Square, pigeons once gathered by the thousands, walking directly up to tourists without a hint of hesitation. In Venice, in Piazza San Marco, pigeons land on outstretched arms as if it is the most normal thing in the world. In Mumbai, entire feeding platforms called Kaptar Khanas exist specifically because pigeons gather there daily, completely unbothered by the crowds around them. In New York, in Tokyo, in Cairo, in almost every dense human city on the planet, the same pattern repeats. Now compare that to almost any other wild bird sharing that exact same space. A crow on that same city street keeps its distance. The sparrow scatters the moment you take one step too close. Even other birds that have adapted to city life still treat humans with caution, keeping a buffer zone, watching carefully, ready to bolt. Pigeons do not seem to have that buffer zone at all. And that difference alone should be raising a much bigger question in your mind right now. Because used to humans is not actually a full answer. Plenty of animals live near humans without losing their fear completely. So something else has to be going on here. Something deeper than simple exposure. To understand it, you have to go back to where pigeons actually came from, because the modern city pigeon is not really a wild animal at all. Every pigeon you have ever seen on a sidewalk descends from a bird called the rock dove, a wild species that originally nested on steep coastal cliffs across Europe, North Africa, and parts of Asia. But here is the detail that changes the entire story. Thousands of years ago, humans began deliberately domesticating that wild rock dove, and they did it earlier and more intensely than almost any other bird species on the planet. Ancient Egyptians kept domesticated pigeons for food and religious ceremony. The Persian Empire used trained pigeons to carry messages across vast distances. Genghis Khan reportedly relied on relay networks of messenger pigeons to move information faster than any horse could travel. Centuries later, in both world wars, pigeons carried critical military messages across battlefields where radio simply could not be trusted. Think about what all of that actually required. You cannot train a fearful, flighty bird to be handled constantly, transported in cages, released under stress, and trusted to fly straight back into human hands. Every single one of those uses depended on selecting pigeons, generation after generation, specifically for calmness around people. Birds that panicked, that fought handling, that could not tolerate close contact, were simply not useful, and were not bred forward. Over thousands of years, that selection pressure did something profound. It did not just train individual pigeons. It reshaped the species' baseline temperament, generation after generation, the same way selective breeding reshaped wild wolves into calm, people-tolerant dogs. So by the time you get to the pigeons walking around your city today, you are not looking at a wild animal that happens to tolerate humans. You are looking at the descendant of an animal that humans spent thousands of years deliberately engineering to be comfortable around us. But domestication alone does not fully explain why pigeons ended up specifically flooding cities, of all places. For that, you need one more piece of the puzzle. Remember that rock doves originally nested on steep, rocky cliff faces, with narrow ledges, sheer drops, and tight crevices tucked into stone. Now look at a modern city skyline with completely fresh eyes. Tall buildings with narrow window ledges, concrete overhangs, bridge undersides, gaps between rooftop structures. To a bird whose entire evolutionary instinct says, nest on ledges, on cliffs, on vertical stone surfaces, a city is not actually a strange, artificial environment at all. It is, almost eerily, a perfect substitute for exactly the kind of terrain its ancestors were built to use. Every skyscraper is a cliff face. Every window ledge is a nesting shelf. Every underpass is a sheltered crevice. This is why pigeons did not simply tolerate cities. They thrived in them immediately because cities accidentally recreated the exact physical landscape their species had already spent millions of years adapting to survive on. So now you have two forces stacking directly on top of each other. A domestication history that already stripped away much of their natural fear of humans, combined with an urban landscape that felt structurally almost identical to home. And there is a third factor, arguably the most powerful one of all, still waiting underneath both of those. Humans feed them, constantly, deliberately, and in some places, for deeply cultural or spiritual reasons that go back centuries. In parts of India, feeding pigeons is considered an act of good fortune, tied to religious tradition, with dedicated feeding platforms maintained specifically for that purpose. In cities across Europe, feeding pigeons in public squares became such an ingrained tourist ritual that vendors once sold small bags of seeds specifically for visitors to scatter. Even after cities like London eventually cracked down on public feeding to control population numbers, the underlying behavior pattern had already been repeating for generations. Here is why that repetition matters so much. Every single time a pigeon walks toward a human and receives food instead of a threat, that interaction reinforces one specific lesson: humans are not dangerous. Humans are, in fact, often useful. And pigeons that learned that lesson fastest, that approached confidently instead of fleeing, ate more, survived better, and passed that same bold, low-fear temperament on to their offspring. Generation after generation, in city after city, across multiple continents, the exact same selection pressure kept repeating itself, entirely by accident, driven by ordinary human behavior. The nervous, easily spooked pigeons quietly lost out on food. The calm, confident ones thrived. If you have been paying attention, you should notice something important right now. This is not one single cause. This is three separate forces compounding directly on top of each other over an extraordinarily long stretch of time. And once you understand a pattern like that, it starts to explain a lot more than just pigeons. Speaking of patterns worth understanding, if breaking down the real reasons behind everyday animal behavior like this is the kind of thing you enjoy, this is exactly what this channel does every single week. Subscribing costs nothing, takes about 1 second, and means you will not miss the next one of these when it drops. Now let's push this a step further, because there is a way to actually measure what we have been describing, instead of just describing it in general terms. Scientists have a specific term for how close you can get to an animal before it decides to flee: flight initiation distance. It is exactly what it sounds like. The distance between you and the animal at the exact moment it breaks and runs, or flies away. For most wild birds living in genuine wilderness, flight initiation distance can stretch to 20, 30, sometimes even 50 meters or more, depending on the species and how much hunting pressure they have historically faced. For city pigeons, that distance often shrinks down to just 1 or 2 meters, sometimes even less, in places where feeding is extremely common. That is not a small difference. That is close to 100-fold reduction in how much personal space a pigeon needs before it feels safe. And crucially, this measurement changes depending on location. Pigeons in heavily fed areas show dramatically shorter flight distances than pigeons living in quieter neighborhoods with less human food access. Which tells you something important. This is not simply a fixed trait baked entirely into the species. It responds directly and measurably to how each specific pigeon population has actually been treated by the humans around it. So the fearlessness you see is not uniform, and it is not accidental. It is a live, ongoing negotiation between genetics inherited from thousands of years of domestication and direct, personal experience gathered within that specific pigeon's own lifetime. Now here is where the story adds one final, slightly uncomfortable twist. Because pigeons lost so much of their instinctive fear of humans, and because cities offer such perfect nesting terrain, populations in many urban centers have grown large enough to create real problems. Droppings damaging historic buildings and monuments. Health concerns tied to dense, concentrated flocks. Aggressive feeding competition in the busiest tourist areas. This is precisely why cities like London eventually banned public pigeon feeding in famous locations, attempting to undo, at least partially, a relationship that had been building for centuries. But here is the deeper irony sitting underneath all of that. Pigeons did not choose to invade human spaces uninvited. Humans built an animal specifically to be comfortable around people, released that animal into cities that mimicked its ancestral home almost perfectly, and then spent generations actively feeding and encouraging exactly the behavior that later got labeled a nuisance. The pigeon did not change the rules. Humans wrote every single one of them, over thousands of years, often without realizing they were writing anything at all. So the next time a pigeon walks calmly past your feet without a flicker of fear, you are not looking at a wild animal that simply failed to learn caution. You are looking at the end result of an ancient partnership, one built through selective breeding across empires, reinforced by architecture that happened to double as artificial cliffs, and cemented, generation after generation, one handful of scattered bread at a time. The bird beside you on that park bench is not confused about what humans are. If anything, it understands exactly what we are, better than almost any other wild creature on this planet, because for thousands of years, in city after city, across continent after continent, we have been quietly teaching it the exact same lesson over and over again. We are not the threat you should be afraid of. And it believed us.